Hi, I'm Dan McClary of Tennessee's Shakespeare Company. Welcome. I hope you are doing okay today. This is our first episode of the Decameron project. It is March 25, 2020, and I didn't make the word Decameron up. For most of you, you probably know this, but for those few of you who don't, the Decameron was a really influential work by a man named Boccaccio in Italy in the mid-14th century. And he was a man of great wealth and terrific connections. And so at the time of the Black Death, or the plague, he was able to escape Florence, and of course he survived, but it also inspired him to write this work. And the work is framed by 7 women and 3 men who managed to escape their own version of the plague, and they self-quarantined themselves outside of Florence for 2 weeks. And they charged themselves with each of the 10 of them, telling a story each night, except on cleaning days and on holy days. And so they come out in the end of this fortnight with 100 stories. And the theme is love and the different kinds of love. Well, and this is important because it influenced Chaucer and it influenced William Shakespeare, our namesake, and so much so that his play All's Well That Ends Well is a direct lift from the Decameron. Well, it inspires us here, given our current circumstances. So we'll take a theme as well, and the themes aren't arbitrary or random. We're using Aristotle's 12 virtues to guide us. Who better? So today's theme for March 25, and maybe we'll do so tomorrow, or maybe all week as well, is spirituality. On this day in 1811, Percy Shelley, the Percy Shelley, the great romantic poet, imagine this, was kicked out of Oxford. And he was kicked out of Oxford for writing a piece of literature called The Necessity of Atheism. Now it's easier to imagine, isn't it? However, what I find hard to imagine is that I don't believe the powers that be read the entire piece. What he does is he considers God a hypothesis. And since God is a hypothesis, therefore he must be proven. And he goes about in an effort to prove. Well, he was all but blackballed for a while, but the piece gets edited by him. And a couple of years later, he creates a magnificent poem called Queen Mab. And if you've heard of Queen Mab, you may well have heard of her from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and out of the mouth of Mercutio, that I see Queen Mab have been with you. And in this poem that Shelley writes, Queen Mab descends from the celestial and visits the terrestrial, visits Ianthe, who's a girl, and Queen Mab takes her spirit or her soul on this excursion to the outer reaches of the galaxy, the outer reaches of the universe, and visits the kingdom or the castle of Queen Mab. And here, Queen Mab introduces the spirit to a utopian world. It's a world in which death isn't feared. It's a world in which humanity and nature coexist in harmony. And he treats on this excursion over the course of 8 or 9 different themes, one of them being vegetarianism, another being on the Christ figure. But if you haven't read it, I urge you to go back and take a look at it. Shelley lived a young life. He was only about 30 when he died, and he knew he wouldn't last long. And as I was going back and rereading some of his work, what I was struck by was a piece of writing that his wife, Mary Shelley, wrote about him after he died. And I thought I might read to you a brief excerpt from something that she wrote to the general public, who sometimes doubted him or judged him or dismissed him. It's important to hear what his wife says about not only the man, but this poem of Queen Mab. This is what Mary Shelley writes about her husband. He was animated to greater zeal by compassion for his fellow creatures. His sympathy was excited by the misery with which the world is bursting. He witnessed the sufferings of the poor and was aware of the evils of ignorance. He desired to induce every rich man to despoil himself of superfluity and to create a brotherhood of property and service, and was ready to be the first to lay down the advantages of his birth. He was of too uncompromising a disposition to join any party. He did not, in his youth, look forward to gradual improvement. Ill health made him believe that his race would soon be run, that a year or two was all he had of life. He desired that these years should be useful and illustrious. He saw in a fervent call on his fellow creatures to share alike the blessings of the creation, to love and to serve each other. The noblest work that life and time permitted him. In this spirit, he composed Queen Mab. There's a brief poem. It's called Music When Soft Voices Die. And by the way, I've surrounded myself lovingly with some very loving books. These are books from our dear friend Dunbar Abston, who passed away recently, and his beautiful, sweet wife, Connie Abston, made a gift of these terrific and classical works of literature. But even more so, they have Dunbar's notes in them. Dunbar, as some of you know, was a scholar and fantastically generous with those of us in the arts and social services in Memphis. So we honor him by reading from his books. This is Percy Shelley. Music, when soft voices die, vibrates in the memory. Odors, when sweet violets sicken, live within the sense they quicken. Rose leaves, when the rose is dead, are heaped for the beloved's bed. And so thy thoughts, when thou art gone, love itself shall slumber on. Art thou afeard? Be not afeard. The isle is full of noises, sounds, and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometimes voices that if I then had waked after long sleep will make me sleep again, and then in dreaming the clouds methought would open and show riches ready to drop upon me, that when I waked I cried to dream again. He only has 140 lines in the play, but that's Caliban, who is the offspring of a witch and a demi-devil. He's enslaved by Prospero in The Tempest, who at the end of this miraculous play says of Caliban, "This thing of darkness I acknowledge mine," and it's true, he may be dark in color, but I prefer to think that Prospero is acknowledging something that's dark within him, his inability to forgive, which he overcomes through his art, through the redemption of his daughter. And for those of us in the arts, in the theater, we consider the work of art to be a spiritual act. Be well. Please be safe. And if you know of someone who would love to hear from you today, give them a call. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. Goodbye.